My name is Christian Gomez, and I did my theoretical analysis on racism and the psychoanalytic elements in Black Mirror's Men Against Fire. Sigmund Freud developed psychoanalysis after attending medical school for neurology in 1881. After graduating, he sought to treat those with psychological disorders. His inspiration in this study came from a colleague's experience with a patient in which he discovered that symptoms worsened with traumatic experiences from the past, which stay hidden in the conscious mind. Freud created a model for the human mind in which there are three layers. First is the conscious, second is the subconscious, and lastly is the unconscious. Eventually, Freud came up with a more structured model, which includes three updated parts to the mind: the ID, ego, and the superego. French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan explored Freud's work and gained a better understanding of language's effects on the unconscious. Lacan came up with three concepts that set it apart from Freud. This includes the real, symbolic order, and the mirror stage. Before Freud, some of the earliest researchers included German physiologist Wilhelm Wundt, who developed the first psych lab and started the first journal dedicated to the study of psychological factors. Many old philosophers utilized their own experiences and subjectivity to illustrate their view on human nature. Freud's work in psychoanalysis helped emphasize the influence of the unconscious mind on behavior. Psychoanalysis consists of several theories and therapeutic techniques that study the unconscious mind and serves as a way to treat mental health disorders. As I stated previously, Freud created his own model of the human mind, which can be divided into three sections. The first is the conscious, which is where our current thoughts and feelings live. Second is the subconscious, which is where memory recall exists. Lastly is the unconscious, which lives in the deepest level of our minds and includes primitive and instinctual desires. Freud also created defense mechanisms for the mind, as these three parts are in constant conflict with one another. These defense mechanisms include repression, denial, projection, displacement, and regression. When psychoanalysis first surfaced, it focused on sex in one's early childhood experiences. Since then, many new methods and techniques are used. Four essential components of psychoanalysis today include interpretation, transference analysis, technical neutrality, and countertransference analysis. In his model, Freud created three metaphorical sections of the mind. The first is the ID, which exists at an unconscious level and focuses solely on instinctual desires. Two biological instincts called eros and thanatos make up the ID. Ego is the second section in Freud's model, and it states that the ego checks on the ID and is linked to reality and develops during infancy. Superego is the last section and serves as the portion of the mind in which morality and values reside, lending to us to believe what is socially acceptable or not. Essentially, the human mind dwells in the realm of unconscious impulses and motivations. The most fundamental conflict is between the ID and the ego. The ID is primitive, and wants and desires are satisfied regardless of the claims of the culture. The ego, on the other hand, is sometimes in a loose alliance with the superego and is obliged to meet the claims and conventions of society. Many of Freud's patients were females who were sexually repressed due to the double standards in society. Men were revered when they spoke about their sexual conquests, while women were punished. As a result, they could develop conversion syndrome. Conversion disorder is a disorder in which a person experiences blindness, paralysis, or other symptoms affecting the nervous system that cannot be explained solely by a physical illness or injury. Symptoms usually begin suddenly after a period of emotional or physical distress or psychological conflict. The male gaze has influenced how women are being viewed and how they should be viewed. It has created a deep psychological disruption in society to the point where mental disorders created from the male gaze can paralyze due to the mental and emotional repression. Popular culture and film have typically represented psychoanalysis from a feminist perspective, noting the production of the male gaze. Freud's psychoanalysis theory is used in television to evaluate and converge symbolic emotional connotations to specific films and television shows. The character's actions, compliancy, and thoughts all become a crucial part to a plot. Mystery and suspense thrive off the notion of ID being repressed by the ego and superego that are trying to dictate the individual's actions due to societal culture, leading to the unconscious and preconscious to become a disarray. This is especially shown through newer pop culture genres such as serial killer documentaries and movies. Even Zac Efron's portrayal of Ted Bundy showcases the dynamic of the ID and ego fighting for dominance as he tries to pass as a typical civilian. Recognition is overlaid with misrecognition. Essentially, popular cinema produces two contradictory forms of visual pleasure. The first is scopophilia, and the second promotes narcissism. Freud would be interested to know that Black Mirror uses his theories quite extensively in the majority of their episodes, sometimes more through subtle symbolism and character suffering, as in the episode Men Against Fire. Racism is a key notion in this film that subtly highlights the power struggle of the ego and ID, and its effect through the unconscious of a soldier named Stripe. Allow me to explain in detail, but first I will provide an overview of the episode so that the theory can be cohesively applied. This episode is being showcased through a third-person perspective of Stripe, a newly deployed soldier who enlisted in the army. His personality is one that conforms to his surroundings, and he has to adapt to being deployed in Denmark. Their main purpose is to hunt and exterminate roaches. Roaches are a form of mutated human deemed to be less than livestock. The notion is that they were mutated due to an inferior and impure bloodline that make them look like a humanoid pale roach. They have no human speech patterns, and they appear to be deadly. They also have no rights and are meant to be killed on sight. Anyone aiding them is to be put on trial. This allows the mass implant that is put in each soldier to function as a communicator, targeting assistant, and it even controls Stripe's 5 senses. It's another addition to his consciousness and his reality. Mass is the standard and current cultural norm in the military, and he shows the ability to adapt to it throughout the episode despite moments of resistance to it. Throughout the episode, contempt and hatred are shown for the roaches. They are compared to animals to be hunted for sport by other soldiers and referred to as trash. Supplies touched by roaches are to be burned as they are viewed as contaminated. Stripe has been trained under the same notion and has been told through the media that the roaches are diseased, cancerous, and much to be eradicated. He feels no remorse when he shoots one down and violently stabs another to death, until the truth is revealed that the roaches aren't mutated at all. His mass was tampered with, and it led Stripe to realize that the roaches were perfectly healthy humans. To put it simply, roaches are normal people who have gone through DNA screenings and have been labeled as impure by society due to higher levels of mental illnesses, biological diseases, and predicated average intelligence. One of the roaches, now known as Katerina, explains how this unfolded just 10 years prior. Post-war, there were DNA tests, and then certain people were required to register. Then there were emergency measures, which alludes to concentration camps and loss of basic human rights. Then came the news that these people had weakness in their blood, and soon followed the propaganda, which classified them as roaches, and then became genocide. From the moment Stripe realizes the mass implant altered his perception of the roaches, he begins to have a psychotic breakdown. His ego and ID are clashing, creating a psychological turmoil. He's given an ultimatum to have his mass reset and his memories of the truth erased, or face imprisonment. Ultimately, he chooses to have it reset, but the emotional damage has already been done. Mass becomes a synthetic replacement for Stripe's ego, ID, and superego, fabricating memories to signify repression. Illusions are projected of a woman to satisfy his primitive desire to mate, allowing his denial to take form through memory altering. This is all to comfortably stay within the realms of acceptance among society. ID. With Mass, Stripe's instinctual desires were met. Food, shelter, and even a mate were given to him in his dreams as a reward for killing a roach. When he was interrogated by Arquette, his therapist, he was offered a drink, a symbol of a basic human desire meant to be satisfied. He fought against this physically while his mind began deploying tactics to fight against the sudden emotional trauma. The ID struggles not against Mass, but against ego to allow Mass to take over the consciousness. Ego is the ethics and moral Stripe was raised with. It becomes slightly distorted in this situation, but the distinction is that Stripe has his set of moral codes that do not factor in a simulation where roaches are human. The moral set that all human life is valuable, and that roaches in danger, that is now muddled. He values all human life and deeply regrets killing innocent people who were wronged by society, and he struggles to maintain onto his ego. and to deny himself of the easy way out and allow his mass to be reset. To allow mass to become his new reality. His ego is fighting against both his ID and superego to maintain control, or the illusion of control, of the consciousness where the current thoughts and perception of reality dwell. Superego is the ultimate need to conform to society and become a passive sheep, and it's a driving force. Peace, love, happiness, and in Stripe's case, ignorance of his murders. In this instance, he is fighting against his ego to maintain a sense of the self that was cultivated through nurture. He was given a chance to rejoin the mass flock and to conform to societal norms of racism. Stripe would have his mass implant reset and all recollection of the truth would be erased. Much like Freud's hypnosis technique. While Freud wasn't able to fully trance his patients, being hypnotized was considered an altered state of consciousness. He left the technique because patients were able to handle the trauma while conscious. In this case, Stripe wouldn't be able to come to terms that he killed humans, even if it was under the guise of mass. So he caves and allows his consciousness to be controlled by mass, not knowing his unconsciousness would always remain intact. In the last scene, Stripe walks to a home being warped by mass sense. An attractive woman comes out to greet him, presumably the mate he was given. As the scene progresses, tears come from his eyes, but his expression doesn't change, because it can't. These tears symbolize that his ego remained intact, despite the hypnosis and memory altering that the mass implant is capable of. His morals, societal construct, and pressures remained intact, but the mass allowed the illusion of roaches being subhumans to become the societal norm he would adhere to through his consciousness. All the while, he would become a prisoner trapped in his unconscious for the rest of his life. This is a quote by Sigmund Freud that I thought fit well with the theme of this presentation. Marxism is based on Karl Marx's theories of class and cultural production. It is through this theory that the importance of class and economic conditions, power relationships, and class ideologies are emphasized. From a Black Mirror perspective, Men Against Fire is representative of Marxism. This episode focuses on a military regiment set in rural Denmark that feels like a dystopian dimension. Food is limited, and the standard of living has been demolished due to the war that occurred 10 years prior. In this world, the U.S. military and government control the masses. Power relations are juxtaposed through military and civilian relations. The soldiers are subject to mass implants, which allow the soldiers to eliminate the lower-class roaches without feeling any remorse or emotion. Roaches aren't even classified as human, as they have no rights, and they are to be killed on sight. The mass completely desensitizes the soldiers, taking it a step further to create false images and nullify shrieking sounds. This is an illusion of class ideologies being used in a negative way. It's comparable to what Hitler employed in World War II. Marxism is present here through the societal imbalance that is only found through the exploitation of the working class, which in this case are those unfortunate enough to believe the propaganda used by those in higher power. I will leave you with a quote from Karl Marx that also aligns with Black Mirror's Men Against Fire.